The first time the Voss family looked at me like I mattered, it was because they thought I was collateral. I was 26 years old, kneeling on the kitchen floor of my uncle's house with a broken wine glass in my hand, when the man in the gray coat read my name off a ledger like it belonged to him already. Ren Ashcombe, Omega, unbonded, unpresented past the legal window, which in the world I came from was its own kind of scandal. A woman who never fully bloomed, never scented right, never proved herself worth claiming. My Uncle Edmund called me defective to my face more than once. That night, he called me lucky. He said it while signing away 3 years of gambling debt with my name instead of his. I did not scream. I did not cry. I picked up the glass, one shard at a time, because somebody was going to bleed if I left it there, and it might as well not be me for once. 6 hours later, a car with no plates idled outside our house, and the whole street went quiet the way streets do when something arrives that could end them. If you want to see what happens when the woman everyone wrote off gets handed, sight unseen, to the most feared alpha in the city, stay with me. Before this story does anything else, do one small thing for me. Subscribe to the channel so you don't lose the rest of it. The car door opened on its own, which I would later learn was for effect, and out stepped a woman I recognized the way you recognize weather before you understand what it means. Black coat, no jewelry, hands loose at her sides like she'd never once needed to make a fist to be believed. The street called her by a name that wasn't on any birth certificate. The widow of Voss. Not because she'd buried a husband, because everyone who crossed her family ended up burying someone, and eventually the name just stuck to her like smoke to wool. She didn't look at my uncle. She looked at me, still on my knees with glass in my palm, and something crossed her face that I couldn't name yet and wouldn't be able to for months. "Get up," she said. Not unkind. Not kind either. Just certain. I got up. "This is the collateral?" Her voice had a flatness to it, the kind that made rooms go still around it. "She's biddable," my uncle said, too fast, the way liars talk. "Good hands, keeps books for the diner." The widow's eyes moved to my hands like she was pricing them, then to the cut on my palm, the blood welling slow and dark. She crossed the kitchen in 4 steps and took my wrist without asking, turned it into the light. "You're bleeding on my paperwork," she said. "Your paperwork isn't in the room," I said. Something changed in her face. It wasn't a smile. It was the absence of the flatness, just for a second, like a door cracking on a lit house. "Bind that," she told the man in gray, and walked out. And that was the whole of my introduction to the woman who would become my wife before the leaves turned. My name is Ren Ashcombe. I want to tell you what happened next the way it happened to me, in order, because if I skip to the end, you won't believe the middle, and the middle is where I became someone worth believing in. The contract came 2 days later, thick as a phone book, drafted by lawyers who looked at me the way you look at a stain on a good coat. Marriage. 18 months minimum, renewable. My uncle's debt erased. My sister's medical costs covered. Talia, 10 years old. Asthma that flared every winter like clockwork. The real reason I'd have signed anything at all. In exchange, I would live at the Voss estate, use the Voss name, and, the contract specified with lawyerly delicacy, make myself available for whatever the designation required, at whatever pace I required it. I read that line 4 times. Then I looked up at the lawyer. "Define available." He blinked like the question had never been asked of him before. "Miss Voss will discuss terms with you directly." She did. The night before the ceremony, in a study that smelled of leather and cold rain and something darker underneath. Clove smoke, maybe, or something like it. A scent I would spend the rest of my life learning by heart without meaning to. "I don't share a bed with strangers," she said, not looking up from the papers she was signing. "Not even ones I've bought." "You didn't buy me. You bought a debt." Now she looked up. "Careful, little accountant. That's a distinction most people in your position don't bother making. Most people in my position didn't do your uncle's books for 6 years before he threw me at you." That got her attention in full. She set down the pen. "You keep books." I balance an entire restaurant's finances in my head faster than the register does it on paper. I've been doing it since I was 14. I didn't know why I told her that. Maybe because no one had ever asked me a question that wasn't really an insult. "Prove it," she said. So I did. She slid a ledger across the desk. 3 years of numbers some accountant of hers had clearly given up trying to reconcile. And I found the discrepancy in under 4 minutes. A shell transfer dressed up as a supply order. $11,000 bleeding out through a vendor that didn't exist. I circled it with her pen and slid it back. She stared at the page a long time. Then at me. "Who taught you to read a ledger like a crime scene?" "My father." The words came out smaller than I meant them to. "He said numbers don't lie, even when everyone around them does." Something moved behind her eyes, fast, gone before I could read it. "Smart man." "He's dead," I said. "Because of it, I think. Nobody ever proved what he found before somebody made sure he stopped looking." She didn't say anything to that, but she didn't look away either. And when she finally spoke again, her voice had lost an edge I hadn't noticed was there until it was gone. "The wedding's at 9. Wear whatever you have. I don't care about the dress." That's the first honest thing anyone said to me in a week. For half a second, I swear, the widow of Voss almost laughed. We married in front of 11 witnesses and a justice of the peace who kept glancing at the door like he expected someone to storm in and stop it. Nobody did. She put a ring on my hand that cost more than every year of my life combined, and her scent, wet slate and clove smoke, sharper up close than I'd braced for, settled over mine the moment our hands touched. And mine, she told me later, was toasted almond and fresh linen, warm enough that half the room noticed, and none of them said a word, because you did not comment on the widow of Voss's new Omega. Not to her face. The estate swallowed our small ceremony like it swallowed everything. 30 rooms of cold marble and colder staff. And that first week, I learned exactly where I stood in this new architecture. Low. The housekeeper, a stern, kind-eyed woman named Petra Lindvist, was the only one who looked at me like a person instead of a line item. The rest, especially the sharp-suited woman who ran the family's legal affairs, Marguerite Sten, cheekbones like a blade and a voice like poured honey over glass, looked at me like something that had wandered in off the street and needed to be swept back out. "She married the accountant's stray," I heard Marguerite say to another guest at a dinner I wasn't meant to attend, "because it was cheaper than a real alliance. Don't get comfortable, little bird. Women like her collect things. She doesn't keep them." I didn't cry in front of anyone. I went to my room, my own room, across the hall from hers, an arrangement she'd set without discussion and I hadn't argued. And I sat on the edge of a bed worth more than my uncle's house, and I let myself shake for exactly 6 minutes, because that was as long as I could afford. There was a soft knock at 11. Thora, I'd started thinking of her by her name by then, in my own head at least, stood in the doorway with a tray. Soup. Plain. The kind my mother used to make when we were sick and had nothing else in the cupboard. "Petra said you didn't eat," she said. "I'm not hungry." "I didn't ask if you were hungry." She set the tray down anyway, careful, like it might break. "Eat something. I have rules about people starving under my roof. Even the ones I married for paperwork." Is that what I am? Paperwork? She was quiet a long moment, looking at the tray instead of me. "No," she said finally. "I don't know what you are yet. I'd like to find out, if you'll let me." It was the closest thing to an apology I ever heard her give, and I understood, watching her stand there in a doorway she didn't need to be standing in, that whatever the contract said, this woman had not signed it lightly. The proof of care kept coming after that, quiet and unannounced. Groceries appeared that matched dishes I'd mentioned once in passing. A space heater in my room the week it turned cold, though I'd never complained. A locksmith sent to fix the jammed latch on my window without me asking, because she'd noticed, apparently, that I checked it every night before sleeping, an old habit from a house where locks mattered. "You count exits," she said one evening, catching me doing it in the hallway, tracing the nearest door out of habit. Force of habit. Whose? Mine now. I looked at her. It used to be my father's. He taught me before he taught me anything else. Where the doors are, where the light switches are. He used to say steady hands make it home, and then he'd make me repeat it back until I believed it. She said nothing, but that night at dinner I noticed she'd had Petra move the seating so my back was to the wall, and my eyes had a clear line to both exits. And she never mentioned it, and neither did I. But I understood then that she had been listening the whole time, more closely than anyone ever had. It was 3 weeks into the marriage when Marguerite Sten found the excuse she'd clearly been hunting for since the wedding. I was in the estate's records room. Thora had given me access after the ledger incident, half amusement, half genuine need, because her actual bookkeeper had quit under mysterious circumstances a year prior, cross-referencing old vendor files out of nothing but restlessness. When I found my father's handwriting. Not a copy, not a reference. His actual handwriting in the margin of a decade-old supply contract belonging to a shell company called Holbrook Freight. The same 3 words underlined twice. Follow the coal money. My hands went cold before my brain caught up. My father had been a forensic auditor for the city before he died, hunting a laundering operation that ran through construction contracts and coal transport fronts, dead in what the papers called a robbery gone wrong when I was 16. Holbrook Freight had never meant anything to me, until I saw it filed, 3 cabinets down, under Voss Family Holdings, dissolved. "You're not authorized in this room without supervision." Marguerite's voice cut across the space like a wire. She stood in the doorway with 2 of Thora's guards behind her, and her smile had teeth in it. "I have Thora's authorization," I said. "Do you?" She crossed to the desk, lifted the folder from my hands before I could close it, and her face did something complicated when she saw what page it was open to. Interesting reading for a new wife, digging into old family business her first month in the house. Almost looks like you married in for a reason other than love, little accountant. I found this by accident. Of course you did. She turned to the guards. Escort her out. I'll be discussing this with Miss Voss personally. They didn't touch me. Thora had made certain, apparently without ever saying so out loud, that no one in this house would ever put a hand on me that I hadn't invited. But I walked out of that records room with my pulse loud in my ears, because I understood, standing in that hallway, that my father had died chasing this family's money, and I had just married into it. And somewhere underneath the coincidence was a truth I wasn't ready for. Thora found me an hour later on the East Terrace, staring at nothing. Marguerite says you were going through old holdings files. Her voice was carefully even, the voice she used when she was deciding how much to believe. I found my father's handwriting in a file about a company your family used to own. I made myself look at her. Hallbrook Freight, coal transport. Does that mean anything to you? Whatever color existed in her face left it. That was before my time. My mother ran a portfolio of shells in the years before she died. I was 17. I was told they were dissolved for tax reasons. My father died investigating money that moved through a company with your family's name on the deed. And nobody ever found who ordered it, I said, and my voice broke on the last word, despite every effort I made to keep it steady. I need to know if I just married the reason he's dead. She didn't flinch away from the question, which I would learn later was the most Thora thing about her. She never flinched from a true thing, only from a soft one. I don't know, she said. But I will find out. I swear that to you on my mother's grave, which is not a small thing for me to offer. I believed her. I didn't know yet if believing her was safe. That night, the storm that had been building over the coast all week finally broke, and the estate's old wiring, original to the house, Petra always complained, failed under the strain. Every light on every floor went dark at once, and somewhere below us an alarm began screaming about a breach in the perimeter fence. And I understood, standing frozen in the sudden black, that whoever had killed my father might have just found out I was living under this roof. Thora's hand found mine in the dark before I even heard her cross the room. Stay against the wall. Don't move toward the window. What's happening? Someone's testing the fence line. Her voice had gone to something I hadn't heard from her before. Low and utterly still. The voice of a woman who had done this exact calculation many times and never once lost. It's probably nothing. It's probably someone checking whether we're rattled enough to make mistakes. Are we? Her hand tightened on mine, just slightly. I'm not going to let anything reach you. I need you to hear that as a fact, not a comfort. We stood like that in the dark for 11 minutes. I counted them, because counting was the only thing keeping my hands from shaking, until the backup generator kicked the lights back on, and Bastian, her second, came pounding up the stairs to report a cut fence line and nothing more. A scare, probably, or a message. Probably, Thora repeated, and I heard for the first time exactly how much she distrusted the word. She didn't let go of my hand until the lights had been steady a full minute. When she finally did, she looked at our hands like they'd betrayed her by fitting together so easily. I should let go, she said. You should tell me if you want to. I don't. The admission cost her something visible. A small crack in the composure she wore like armor. I haven't wanted to hold anyone's hand in 4 years. I'd like you to know that isn't nothing. Coming from me. What happened 4 years ago? She was quiet long enough that I thought she wouldn't answer. Then, I had someone. A wife before you. Unofficial, never contracted, never announced. Because my mother said love was a liability the Voss name couldn't carry. She died in a car that had been tampered with, on a road she took every week to see her mother. And I have never once found who ordered it. And I have spent 4 years turning that failure into a wall, so no one could ever cost me that much again. I'm not asking you to tear the wall down. I know, she said. That's the strange part. I think I'm doing it anyway. I didn't kiss her that night, but I stood close enough to feel the warmth off her skin. Close enough that her scent, slate and clove smoke, deeper now, softened somehow, wrapped around mine. And when she finally stepped back, it was with visible effort, the restraint of someone choosing not to take what she badly wanted. And I understood that restraint, in this house, was its own kind of confession. The weeks that followed were the gentlest of my life. She taught me the estate's real geography, not the showrooms, but the working ones. The kitchen where Petra let me help make bread on Sundays. The garden where Thora, unbelievably, kept a small, stubborn patch of tomatoes she tended herself, badly, with the fierce concentration of someone determined to be good at one soft thing. I taught her, in turn, how to read a spreadsheet the way my father had taught me. How numbers told stories if you asked them the right questions. She was terrible at it. She laughed, actually laughed, twice, both times looking startled at the sound of her own voice doing it, when I tried to explain amortization using restaurant inventory, and she kept getting distracted by how badly her own accountants had apparently been fleecing her for years. "You're better at my books in a month than the man I paid to do them for 6 years, she said one night, scattered papers between us on the study floor, both of us cross-legged and inelegant in a way the house had probably never seen. He wasn't stealing from you the way I am. Are you stealing from me? Only your evenings, I said, and she went very still. And then she reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, slow, giving me every chance to lean away. I didn't lean away. Tell me to stop and I will, she said. Don't stop. The kiss that followed was careful in a way I hadn't known a person like her could be careful. Like she was afraid of her own strength. Like the whole weight of what she wanted terrified her more than any enemy ever had. When she pulled back, her forehead rested against mine and her breath was unsteady. And I felt, underneath my own ribs, the strange new warmth of being wanted by someone who had chosen, deliberately, not to take. It didn't last. It never does in stories like mine. Not until the ledger's been balanced all the way to the bottom line. The blow came 9 days later, and it came for the one place I had no armor at all. I was at the estate gate signing for a delivery when Petra came running across the drive, no coat, face gray. Ren, the school called. Talia never got off the bus. My whole body went to ice. What do you mean she never got off the bus? They said a woman signed her out early, said she was your cousin. The school released her before anyone thought to check. I don't remember calling Thora. I remember her arriving at a dead run across the gravel. Remember the look on her face when she saw mine. Remember her saying my name the way you'd say a word you were afraid might shatter. The note arrived by courier an hour later, unsigned, though I already knew the handwriting from a decade-old margin note about coal money, and a lifetime of watching people who smile with their teeth and not their eyes. Bring the Halbrook file and everything in it to the old freight terminal by midnight. Come alone. Tell no one, especially not your wife, or the girl doesn't come home with all her fingers. I told my wife anyway. I had learned by then exactly what kind of woman I'd married, and she was not the kind you kept secrets from when a child's life was the stake on the table. Thora read the note twice, and when she looked up, her eyes had gone to something I'd never seen in them, something with no restraint left in it at all. Marguerite, she said, one word, absolute certainty. You don't know that. I know the handwriting on the vendor forgery in my mother's old files, because I finally had it analyzed this morning, 3 hours before your sister disappeared, which is not a coincidence I intend to forgive." Her voice had dropped to something glacial. "My mother didn't run those shells alone. Marguerite ran them with her. Your father found the coal money because Marguerite was skimming it for herself under my mother's nose. And when he wouldn't stop looking, she had him removed. And she spent every year since terrified someone would find the paper trail. You walked into my house holding the one file that could still hang her." The floor seemed to tilt under me. "She's had 10-year-old Talia for over an hour because of a file I didn't even know I'd found." "She's had her for an hour," Thora said, taking both my hands, forcing my eyes to hers. "And she will not have her for an hour more. I promise you that. Not as comfort, as fact." We went to the freight terminal together, against every rule Marguerite's note had set, because Thora did not send her wife alone into a trap for anyone, and because I would not be left behind while my sister was somewhere in the dark counting exits the way our father taught us both. The terminal was exactly the kind of place this story required. Cavernous, half-lit, stacked containers turning the space into a maze of blind corners. Marguerite stood in the center of it with Talia's hand gripped too tight in hers, and my sister's face when she saw me broke something loose in my chest that I have never fully put back together. "You brought company," Marguerite said, unbothered, eyes flicking to Thora. "Predictable. Sentiment always was your family's weak floorboard." "Let her go," I said. "I have the file. That's what you wanted." "I want the file burned, and I want you both to understand that this house was never yours to inherit any piece of." Marguerite's honeyed voice had an edge under it now, thin as a wire pulled tight. 10 years I built this family's real fortune, while your mother took the credit and your wife took the throne. And I will not watch her hand it to some stray with her dead father's ghost stapled to her back. "You killed him," I said, and my voice didn't shake, which surprised me more than anyone. "You killed my father because he found your money." "I removed an inconvenience." She said it the way you'd describe pruning a hedge. "The same way I'm about to remove this one." Her hand tightened on Talia's shoulder, and my sister's breath caught in the particular high whistle that meant her asthma was climbing. Fear closing her airway the way it always did under stress. And every calculation I had left in me collapsed into one single fact. I could not lose her. "Ask me with your words," Thora said, low, not to me, to Marguerite. And I understood a half-second before it happened that this was not a request. "Ask me to let you walk out of this building. See if I say yes." What happened next took 11 seconds. I counted them later, lying awake, the way I count everything that matters. Marguerite reached for the gun at her hip. Thora crossed the distance between them faster than a woman her size should move, and the shot that fired went wide and buried itself in a container wall instead of a body, because Thora had already closed the gap and taken the blow meant for me across her own shoulder instead, a knife she hadn't seen coming until it was already in her. I screamed her name. I don't remember deciding to run to her, only that I was there, hands pressed to the wound, and Marguerite was on the ground with Bastion's forearm across her throat, disarmed, and Talia was sobbing into Petra's coat 20 feet away, safe, breathing, alive. "I'm fine," Thora said through her teeth, which was a lie, and we both knew it. "You are not fine, you absolute—" I didn't have a word big enough. "You took a knife for me." "Now we're even," she managed, almost a laugh. "For the wine glass." Marguerite, pinned and bleeding pride more than blood, spat something venomous about legacy and weakness, And I watched Thora, pale, wounded, one hand fisted in my sleeve like she needed the anchor of me more than the pain would admit. Look down at the woman who had killed my father and orphaned my sister's peace of mind. And I saw the exact moment Thora decided to become the kind of monster her mother had raised her to be. "Don't," I said. Just that. She looked at me. Really looked. The way she looked at me that first night with the wine glass, pricing something. Except this time what she found made her hand loosen on the collar she'd fisted in Marguerite's shirt. "She doesn't get to cost you your own hands too," I said. "Let the family court try her. Let the whole city watch you be the kind of power that doesn't need to kill to win." It took her a long moment. Then she stepped back, and something in her shoulders came down that had been up, I think, for 4 years. "Take her to the council," she told Bastian. "Every file, every ledger. I want her ruined in a courtroom, not a warehouse. That's worse for a woman like her. And it's better for us." The Voss family council convened 5 days later in a room I'd only seen from the servants' stairwell, and every relative who'd ever looked through me like glass sat in that room and watched Marguerite Sten's decade of theft, forgery, and murder laid out on a screen in the neat, damning columns I had built from my father's decade-old handwriting and 3 weeks of records I hadn't been supposed to have access to. I stood at the podium myself because Thora insisted, arm in a sling, standing close enough behind me that I could feel her presence like heat off a fire. And I walked that room of sneering elites through 11 years of stolen coal money, one line at a time, until there was nothing left of Marguerite's defense but silence. She was stripped of her position, her holdings seized, exiled from every territory the family touched, under permanent watch by the very authorities she'd spent a decade bribing into blindness. My uncle's debt, already forgiven, stayed forgiven. He was cut loose from the household's protection all the same, a mercy and a consequence both, exactly as much as he'd earned. Talia's medical fund was quietly tripled without anyone asking. And when the room finally emptied, Thora took my hand in front of the last of the lingering relatives, the ones who'd called me a stray and a paperwork wife, and worse, and said, loud enough to carry, "This is my wife. She built the case that just ended a war none of you had the stomach to fight. I'd remember that if I were you." That night, in the quiet of her study, she got down on one knee, properly this time, no contract lawyer, no debt behind it, and opened a small, worn box that held not a diamond, but a compass, brass, dented at one corner. "It was my mate's," she said, "the one I lost. I've kept it 4 years because I couldn't decide what it meant to let it go. I think I finally know." She closed my hand around it. "Steady hands make it home. You taught me that without meaning to. I'd like it to be yours now, and I'd like to be the home it points to. If you'll let me ask you properly this time. Marry me, Ren. Not the contract. Me." I said yes with tears on my face and no shame in them at all. 6 months later, we married again, this time in the garden with the badly tended tomatoes, Talia as flower girl in a dress she'd picked herself, Petra crying openly in the second row, Bastian gruffly presenting us with a gift he'd clearly agonized over, his late wife's old signet ring, refitted for my hand, the closest thing to a blessing that hard, careful man knew how to give. "In 15 years, he told me, gripping my shoulder once, hard. I never once saw her wait for anyone. She waited for you." The claiming came that night, slow and certain, every step asked for and answered, her mouth at my throat only after I'd said the word yes 3 separate times, because she wanted no doubt in either of our bodies about what we were choosing. The bond settled into me like a held breath finally released. A year on, Talia's asthma barely troubles her anymore. City air scrubbed clean by the environmental fund Thora quietly built in my father's name. The vendor who forged Halbrook Freight's books sits in a cell 2 states over. And some mornings, in the pale gold light before the household wakes, I find my wife in the garden anyway, still terrible with tomatoes, the brass compass she gave back to me hanging warm against my collarbone, pointing, as it always does now, at nothing but the truth, that I was never defective, never astray, never collateral for anyone's debt. I was only ever waiting for someone with the patience to look close enough to see it. The girl everyone mocked did not need saving. She only needed someone to finally do the arithmetic and see what she was worth. The end. If this is the kind of story that stays with you, the quiet ones nobody expected to matter, turning out to be the strongest voice in the room, subscribe to the channel so the next one finds you the moment it's ready. I'd love to know in the comments, what do you think Ren's father would say if he could see the family his ledger finally brought to justice? Tell me below. Until the next story, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you soon.